leaders always need to be of service to their employees or constituents, right? And I think it's very important that they provide guidelines. And I'm not talking about boxing people in into certain things, but quite the opposite, right? I think the role of the leader right now is to provide the resources to their employees, to their constituents, and talk to them about what they believe is important.
Hi, I'm James Taylor, business creativity and innovation keynote speaker, and this is The Creative Life, a show dedicated to you, the creative. If you're looking for motivation, inspiration, and advice while at home, at work, or on your daily commute, then this show is for you. Each episode brings you a successful creative, whether that's an author, musician, entrepreneur, performer, designer, or thought leader. They'll share with you their journey, their successes, their failures, their creative process, and much, much more. You'll find show notes for this episode, as well as free training on creativity, over at jamestaylor.me. Enjoy this episode. Hey there, it's James Taylor, and I'm delighted today to have on the show Alex Goryachev. Alex is Managing Director of Cisco's Global Co-Innovation Centers. He spearheads several award-winning international programs and initiatives to accelerate innovation, whether that impacts operations, business processes, or technology. An award-winning Silicon Valley veteran whose resume reads like a brief history of tech disruption, Alex is a sought-after speaker on innovation and a regular contributor to Forbes, Chief Executive Magazine, Information Week, and other leading media outlets. His new book is called Fearless Innovation, Going Beyond the Buzzword to Continuously Drive Growth, Improve the Bottom Line, and Enact Change. It's my great pleasure to have Alex today. Welcome, Alex.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.
So share with us all what's happening in your world at the moment.
My world is fantastic. My wife and I, we're in the middle of this bold experiment, which is called Bring Your Work to Kids Day, or it's probably going to be a week and hopefully not months. But both of us are working from home, and we have 2 kids here, so it's a joy fest.
So is this something that you're very familiar with, the kind of working from home thing anyway, or are you going into an office every day? Or you're traveling every day?
Yeah, it's now I feel like an early pioneer of something, right? It's I'm glad you're bringing this up. I've actually been living here in Southern California for about 7 years, and I pretty much work from home, right? And I do lead a global team. I have employees in 14 countries. I suspect most of them work from home as well. I'm kind of lucky to work for the company where working from home has always been an employee's choice. And not that there's many employees, there's only about 74,000 of us, right? And we're lucky to have the infrastructure from VPN to all the tools in the world for us to be productive. So for me, there's no disruption, right? Except for my 5.5-year-old son Matthew, who is studying my schedule every day. It says, "Daddy, your call will be over in 1 hour, and we're going to go and build Legos." Yeah.
Well, that's good. You're managing to mix it up there as well, which is fantastic. And congratulations. I know the book has just hit the Wall Street Journal bestseller list, so congratulations on that. First of all, take us back a little bit. I mean, you actually, I was just kind of reading our background. There's some similarities. You actually have a background in music and the music industry before coming into working with Cisco. So where did everything get started for you? Where did all this interest in innovation and technology start?
Yeah, for me, it was kind of out of necessity, right? Necessity was very simple. When I was much younger, I was transplanted into the United States, and English was always my second language. And kind of despite having an A+ grade in the Soviet school for it, when I came to New York City, I quickly realized that I can probably understand some words, but I definitely cannot put them together, right? However, reading and writing was much easier, and at that time, so let's just admit my social life suffered. And as a result, I discovered online services. And this was way before, Prodigy or CompuServe America Online, right? I discovered a Unix shell, and I discovered Usenet and a lot of those wonderful things and the community of people online. I started to become very immersed in this digital living, right? As we all are now. And as a result, I kind of self-taught myself a lot of things. And then the World Wide Web came out, and probably, as we all as we all know, the entertainment industry was the first industry to be digitized. It's kind of was always the pioneer. So there I was building solutions for the music industry.
So the music industry was almost like it was the canary in the coal mine. It was there right at the start. I mean, it's interesting. A lot of my friends who are authors, they started experiencing probably about 5 years ago what we'd experienced in the music industry. Probably, I don't know. I think it was around. So you were at Napster, which must be about 95. When were you kind of getting into the kind of technology disruption that was kind of going on?
Slight after this was the kind of on the cusp of the century. I love the way it sounds, the cusp of the century. But so before Napster, I was actually with a company called Liquid Audio, and we pioneered the digital rights management. Right, it was all about how do we track online downloads. And I remember working with Billboard magazine and convincing them that, hey, there's this thing called online downloads. You should do a chart. And the response was obviously, no, we have enough charts. We don't collect data online. It's pointless, right? And fast forward, I think the only chart that they've got is probably online downloads. If they're still around, I haven't seen Billboard in a long time.
So one of the things that you mentioned in your book is about the difference between disruption and innovation. Obviously, the music industry went through a lot of disruption, but initially there wasn't a huge amount of innovation, certainly from the record labels that were kind of going on. So first of all, tell us, how do you define innovation, and what do you see as that difference between innovation and what we often hear now about like disruption?
Yeah, it's a great question, right? When I think about, and if you don't mind, I'll mix an invention in there as well, right? But maybe if we start with the big picture, disruption happens no matter what, right? If I think about where we are today, we're recording this on March 17th, 2020. We are, as the humanity, are in the middle of a big disruption. And this disruption did not come from technology. It did not come from innovation. I don't believe in conspiracy theories, so it probably did not come from a lab somewhere, right? So it just happened. And if I think about disruptions just happen, right? And then innovation is something that kind of is, to be honest, is our response to it, right? And if I look at in my hometown, by the county order, most of the restaurants are closed. However, they're innovating with things like delivery or curbside pickup or so many other things, right? So right now we're seeing pretty much every single business innovating. And as a result, new things and new business models, they happen, right? To me, innovation is something that involves team, and that is something that involves in execution.
And you mentioned about, I think it was ingenuity was another word that you used there as well. What do you see as the difference between creativity, or maybe ingenuity, and innovation versus innovation? How do those two things, are those two things the same or interchangeable, or do you see them as different parts or different areas of the same value chain, I guess?
Yeah, they're different areas of the same value chain. The one thing that I want to say is, and because I come from a corporate space, right? But typically innovation has a pragmatic outcome, right? So creativity is a form of energy, and that's an essential part of innovation, right? And it obviously can exist without any innovation as well. But in essence, innovation is all about execution. At the end of the day, innovation has a pragmatic outcome that benefits your company, your society, your community, or your stakeholder base, right? Creativity could be just something that just benefits you only, right? So innovation has a much wider adoption, I would say. And I almost, I kind of feel bad about even mixing this together, because look, creativity is something that's, I think, is connected with the soul, and it's connected with with our aspirations as humans. Innovation is much broader, right? It has so many different meanings.
So you mentioned that having that one of the differences there is around the kind of individual versus perhaps the team or the organization. How can teams go in terms of innovation from something just being perhaps an intellectual idea? Okay, this would be an interesting thing, or this is interesting, or this interesting question, to actually kind of moving that to not it just being an intellectual construct, but actually something that teams do. Something you mentioned about it's about executing. How do you move innovation from being something that's just talked about by senior executives, that's maybe put up on the values of a company on their website, to actually being something that really inhabits that organization?
The key word that you said is the team, right? Because at the end of the day, creativity or things like invention, right? It could be a lonely sport, right? But if I look at innovation, right, it's a team sport. And in order for anything to happen, it takes people, right? Even if, let's say, you are a writer, right, and you're very creative, you wrote a book, it still takes somebody to go and publish and distribute it, and etc. Even if you self-publish, you are still reliant on others. And most importantly, it requires a reader, right? And when you think about creativity, particularly creativity in the workplace, it's all about the teams, and it's all about people with diverse point of view, right? Because at the end of the day, that creativity, it often, in a constrained work environment, right? And no matter how free it is, we're still constrained by time, by our needs, by the supply of money, by our executive careabouts, by our stakeholders. It needs to be channeled towards something, and it needs to exist for a pragmatic purpose. And I think the teams are the ones that can go and help refine it, right? We often use the words customer validation. Well, to your point, you talked about having an idea. Having an idea is essential, right? And you might want to build something. But often in many technology companies, for example, or any product offerings, it's about not can it be built, but should it be built, right? Is there a customer demand for it? Does it really solve a problem? And unfortunately, as we move from the kind of the arts and literary space to the corporate space, there's a much tighter grip into what is creativity and how do you use that creativity for a pragmatic purpose.
So sometimes from the outside, when we hear this kind of word innovation in a corporate sense, we might be thinking of, a bunch of people in a room, maybe with some a whiteboard, Post-it notes, discussing, challenging each other's ideas, perhaps with a prototype of something. Because of the situation we're in just now, where people often physically can't even be in the same room together because of what's going on, what do you think that's going to have an effect on innovation, positive or negative, when we perhaps have to use more kind of online tools and online collaboration?
I think it's a positive effect for innovation, right? And here's the thing. I think social interaction is essential, right? For us to be, we are as people, we're social animals, right? We want to be near other people. We want to talk to them. At least I do, right? I enjoy talking to people. When I think about this time particularly, I think it's a phenomenal type for creativity, and it's a phenomenal time for innovation for one simple reason, right? We tend to innovate well in the time of crisis, right? You and I talked about problem solving, right? And right now there's so many problems to solve, right? There's just anywhere you go, from how do we protect our elderly to how we educate our kids, how do we fight the virus, how do we stay connected? And again, for the listeners in the United States, is like, where do we find the toilet paper, right? But there's so many different problems, and all of them are very different for different people, right? And already I'm seeing a lot of different offerings that are coming up online, that are people getting together and experimenting. So while we're divided physically, I think digitally we are coming together as a community much stronger.
So as we begin to have that kind of distributed, almost like there's a kind of distribution of innovation in that way, what is the role of leadership? What is that link between leadership and innovation? What should be leaders be trying to do or not do in order to kind of foster that innovative culture and the systems and the processes to making it happen?
Well, I think if I look at the leader role, right? I mean, leaders always need to be of service to their employees or constituents, right? And I think it's very important that they provide guidelines. And I'm not talking about boxing people in into certain things, but quite the opposite, right? I think the role of the leader right now is to provide the resources to their employees, to their constituents, and talk to them about what they believe is important, right? And most of us humans, right, having the resources and understanding where we need to focus our attention will help us move forward.
And of the organizations that you perhaps studied and you kind of talked about in the book, were there anyone that you thought were particular highlights in terms of making sure that innovation was not just a job title? We often, a lot of companies have a chief innovation officer, but it was actually something that everyone in the organization could really take ownership of and could do something towards helping.
Well, I'm a bit biased here because I work for Cisco and I love Cisco so much. It's a tremendous part of my life. But I really believe that at Cisco, and again, that's the company that I know the best, is innovation um, is not a job title, right? It belongs to every employee. And that's because we define innovation broadly, right? It's not only about shipping new products. Of course, we ship new products, and they're the best in the world. But it's about servicing customer faster and better. Right now, it's about how do we connect the schools? How do we connect the emergency services? Everybody has a voice, right? And it doesn't matter if you're in a marketing team, HR team, or any other team. In fact, at Cisco, I would say that HR plays a significant role in innovation because not only it's an innovative organization, but it enables other teams to innovate, which I think is critical.
So one in your title is about manager director of Cisco's Global Co-Innovation Center. So for people that haven't heard that term co-innovation, what does that actually mean?
It actually means doing things together with the ecosystem, right? If I think about the co-innovation, just in the spirit of, we just talked about employees, for example. It's all about working together with employees and co-creating with them, right? Because in the knowledge economy, it's all about partnership, right? It's partnership with your employees, it's partnership with the communities. So I think at Cisco, we understand that innovation does not happen in the four walls of Cisco. Innovation happens when we work with our communities, when we work with universities and partners and resellers and governments, people, startups, right? And that's when those amazing things happen.
Now, in terms of when it comes to the measurement of innovation, what should, you hear different companies measure innovation or think about innovation in different ways. The one I seem to remember was I think it was 3M that used to have a percentage of their revenues or profits had to come from products which hadn't been invented 5 years ago or something along those lines in terms of product innovation. What are some of the things that you tend to look at within Cisco or within some of the companies that you looked at in terms of actually how they measured, how they knew if they were doing well by innovation?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's essential that companies actually measure innovation. I see that there's somehow like metrics and innovation is not necessarily the most pleasant topic. And whenever you go in a meeting with different companies and you talk about metrics, kind of people want to run away. I do believe innovation must be measured and it should be measured. And frankly, your innovation effort must begin with a metric in mind, right? And what's a metric? Metric is all about having a sense of purpose and a focus. And that's something that you and I covered before in this conversation. So I think when you start innovating, and it's a loaded word, when you begin any new effort, right? Or when you try to focus your employees on a new effort, I think it's important to understand for yourself and communicate what is the metric that you're trying to move. be that employee engagement, be that brand perception, be that new revenue, operational savings. I mean, any metric is valid as long as that metric is understood by you as a leader and then understood by your employees. And frankly speaking, your leadership and your peers agree to it. I think that's important. I often see quite the opposite of this when people say, go to the employees and they say, hey, how about we all become very innovative? And nobody really knows what that means, right? If you go back to that leader and say, hey, can you please explain what being innovative means? Often, unfortunately, there's no answer. So having that clarity is essential.
It's interesting. I mean, I think that's, you do a lot of speaking. I do a lot of speaking as well. And it's one of the challenges we sometimes have, I certainly have with clients, is that when you have a pre-event call, for example, and you say, what does success look like? What is the thing that you're measuring to know whether you're making some kind of movement? Now, it's difficult in the context of someone just giving a keynote, for example. But if you're doing a series of works or a program of works that can help someone to move there, it does require that sometimes they actually have to stop and then, I guess, ask, well, when we say innovation, what is that? How are we measuring that as well? And it seems a lot of the time it's not really being measured in the same way or being thought of in the same way as other kind of KPIs like revenues or earnings per customer or any of those things.
Yeah, and I know we're here to talk about creativity, and I feel kind of strange bringing this up, but again, I think metrics are essential, and you have to begin with those metrics. I wish I would find a word for this that's not as draconian as metrics, right? Because when I think of metrics, it's like almost like grades, pass, fail. But to me, it's about focus, and I think it's essential that when you talk about companies, that leadership is on the same page, right? Because when, let's say there's three teams and the team A says, well, these are my metrics, and team B says, these are my metrics, at least there's an understanding of what the teams are trying to build, and they can work together better. And then it goes back again to the problem solving approach. I think it's essential to identify a problem that you want to solve. And I think that every company has problems that to solve or to manage. I should say, not every problem is solvable. So I don't think it's a hard task to identify one.
And in your own journey through the various different jobs that you've had, different roles you've had, working on, we were talking about this kind of idea of co-innovation where you're working with other stakeholders. Was there a key light bulb moment or an aha moment in your work where you went, okay, this is an important distinction, or I really want to make sure that we do this in future, or you just had one of those kind of key insights in your life and your work?
Yeah, I think it happened. Most of my insights, right, over the last decade were at Cisco, but I think the one particular is, for a number of years, I've been running all the startup engagement for the company in terms of the competitions and challenges, and let's call it broadly sourcing of startups. And we've been running a number of offerings for the global startups to go and pitch their ideas to Cisco. And as a result, we were offering mentorship and money and equipment and so many other different things. And then at certain points, employees started to call me and saying, hey, can I participate in this glamorous and very valuable competition of yours? And I would look at the terms and conditions, and somewhere on page 4 at the bottom, it would say employees are not eligible. And that's the message that I would relay. And at a certain point, a couple of employees talked to me, and I realized, well, why are we offering something to startups but not offering this to our employees? And that's something where I really decided to build this cross-functional program at Cisco. And it wasn't really hard, because at Cisco, we had and we have phenomenal innovation programs, but they're typically focused on the function, right? So it's for engineering or for marketing, right? And what I realized is by connecting them together, we would have far better outcomes. And you and I talked about the inclusion and diversity, and that's exactly the case. When you have people with different backgrounds from different parts of the world solving a problem, you'd have a much better solution.
That's fantastic. And do you, in terms of your work that you do today, is there an online resource or a tool or an app like an Evernote that you find very useful in kind of capturing these ideas and being able to communicate some of these ideas when you're working with your teams?
It's so we do have a number of idea management kind of we have a number of platforms at Cisco, because obviously with a company with over 70,000 employees with hundreds of offices in dozens of countries, that's essential, right? Having said that, my favorite tool is the paper and pen. And I tend to write something on notepads. I can't read it later. I can't understand it, but at least but I think I developed some kind of a muscle memory as I do this. And I often see that there's some kind of enamorment with tools in the companies. There are often small innovation teams that they're starting. They're asking me, like, Alex, what are the tools that we should use for innovation or for managing the idea pipeline? And my response is typically, how many ideas do you have? And I often hear none, or maybe 2 or 3. And I'd say, well, start with the paper and pen. So the paper and pen is very old-fashioned, and that's my tool of choice.
I love that. I love the analog old school, which is contrasting with the very kind of futuristic technology what the Cisco does. If you could recommend just one book, not your own book, we're gonna talk about that in just a minute and have links for that. But if you could recommend one book by another author, and also because you come from a background in music, one album or record to our audience, what would those be? What would that be, that book and that record?
So for the book, I would say, now that we're all as connected as before, and we are connected online virtually, I would say there's a book by Cal Newport, which is called Digital Minimalism, which is choosing a focused life in a noisy world, right? I think it's essential that we kind of enjoy this quiet time as much as we can. And we brought our work to homes, and we brought it to our kids, and we brought it into our living rooms and everywhere, right? And I suspect most of mobile phones are already in our bedrooms. So kind of learning to shut it off is the essential challenge. I'm trying to master that challenge, and I think it's pretty good for mental health, right? You might see a trend here. I talked about paper and pen, and I talked about learning to disconnect. So one of the reasons I use paper and pen is because it forces me to put my iPad or iPhone or computer away, so that I don't refresh CNN or Twitter. So it's about self-discipline, right? And learning new ways, and reading paper books. So I do recommend a paper book. And as far as the albums, look, I'm a old kind of old school rock and roll guy. So I keep listening to Pink Floyd and Roger Waters, and I know the world moved on since those times, but I still find those lyrics quite timeless. Or maybe I'm just stuck in time. Who knows?
Fantastic. And once again, a nice mix. Cal Newport's Digital Minimalism, fantastic book. I just read it recently. Very, very good book. And then also Pink Floyd as well. And then Alex, I want you to imagine you woke up tomorrow morning and you have to start from scratch. So you have all the tools of your trade, all the knowledge you've acquired over the years, but no one knows you and you know no one. What would you do? How would you restart things?
That's an exceptional question. And I think the question is, which things would I want to build, right? It's not really, it's if I have all the knowledge, right? And it's not really about which, to be honest, I would really focus, and that's something that I've been trying to do lately in my life. And that's something that I'm seeing a lot of companies that are doing, including Cisco. To me, it's really being focused on how can we go as a society and achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. For those of you that are not familiar, it's really about everything from clean water to access to education and taking care of our planet. I'm hoping that everyone in the world just got a kick in the butt, right? Understanding how connected we are and how much the environment matters, right? And what we need to do to protect ourselves and the planet. So I think that would be my focus. And I do believe that technology can and should and will play a pivotal role there.
Well, Alex, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Where is the best place for people to go to learn more about your work, what you do, and also to get a copy of the book?
I think it's, you can find me on Cisco blogs, or you can find me at alexgoryachev.com.
Great. I'm going to have all those links here. Alex, thanks so much for coming on today. I wish you all the best, and good luck to your children for having to look after you while you're at home as well just now.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well said. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
If you're interested in living a more creative life, then I'd love to invite you to join me as I share some of the most successful strategies and techniques that high-performing creatives use. I put them all together in a free downloadable ebook that you can get by going to jamestaylor.me. That's jamestaylor.me to get your free downloadable ebook on creativity.